So, thank you for joining us for this podcast. My name is Tom Charity. I'm one of the programming team at the Vancouver International Film Festival, and this interview is being recorded on day 5 of VIFF on the unceded traditional lands of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. And our guest today is Asher Penn. Welcome, Asher. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Tom, for having me.
Your film is Physician, Heal Thyself. It's a documentary about Dr. Gabor Maté, and it's your first feature film. Perhaps we could start off just by talking about your own background and what got you involved, interested in making films.
So I first got interested in making films while I was working in publishing, and I'd been operating an independent magazine and found myself doing quite a bit of coordination, and it developed a bit of confidence in my abilities in terms of coordination, and working with lots of different people that did a lot of different things at the same time. And that was what led me to producing a feature-length documentary called Maggie Lee's Mommy, which came out in, I believe, 2015, might have been 2016. And it was a feature-length, very experimental, artistic documentary film chronicling the story of the death of her own mother and her own coming of age as an artist. And I worked with her from day one till long after it. And the film was it never played any festivals because both Maggie and I and most of the people involved actually came from a fine art background. So we didn't really actually understand a lot. Fine art is actually, even in experimental film, have very different parameters than actual the kinds of films that are allowed to play in theaters or sell on streaming services and stuff. So that was how I got involved. First, kind of got the bug.
That was your film school?
That was one of them. That was a pretty, I'm very, very proud of the movie, but made a lot of mistakes, and also it was limited because of the fact that we had, it was kind of almost like an internet collage film. And and we did not have any kind of preparation or knowledge of how festivals worked or how distribution worked or anything like that. But that was how I first got interested in working on films, and I worked on a handful of other films, more as an associate producer, helping out with marketing and things like that. And this might be the long answer to it, but I've since the age of 25 been conducting and editing interviews, and had gotten really comfortable with interview as a medium, and had been interested in at some point directing my own feature. And and I think that's what kind of gave me the confidence to actually believe that a documentary with an interview with Gabor could be a film.
So the interviews that you're referring to, were those for magazines?
Yeah. The first interview I ever did was for a Vancouver-based magazine called Only. I don't think it exists anymore. And it was, funnily enough, with not Douglas Copeland. I wish it was Doug. It was good. It was with William Gibson, and which was really a cool moment. It was a really interesting moment. He was kind of between books. It was after pattern recognition, and this online phenomena had come up called Lonely Girl 15. I don't know if you remember that. The very first kind of viral YouTube fictional work, or work that kind of bended fiction. And to me, it drew a lot of parallels to what William Gibson had written about in pattern recognition as this thing called the footage. And because I was 25 and a little crazy, I figured out how to get in touch with his manager and figured out how to get him to meet me to answer a few questions. And that was my first interview. And I was blown away that I could even do that, that I would be able to, with a handful of emails and a publisher behind me, to be able to sit down with somebody whose work I really admired and appreciated and be able to ask them some questions And so I really enjoyed that. Like I said, I have a fine art background, but interviews became a thing that I felt I kept on doing them. And wherever my art practice was going, interviews were always kind of something that I kept on doing. So
who else have you interviewed that we might have heard of?
You're from the film side. I've interviewed Paul Schrader, Whit Stillman. I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing Abel Ferrara, which was hilarious because he thought he had I'd prepared for it by watching all 25 of his films, and I had kind of driven myself a little crazy. And I got there, and he thought that we only had 12 minutes, and I said, no, I mean, I want to kind of do some kind of like survey interview, and we ended up doing it in chunks. So I probably spent about 10 and a half hours on the phone with Abel Ferrara interviewing him. And
I interviewed Abel Ferrara once. It was around the time of Addiction.
Oh, wow.
And he was in London for the film festival there, and the interview before mine was with a good friend of mine, a very experienced journalist, and Abel Ferrara fell asleep in his interview.
Yeah.
That has never happened to me. But he woke up for me, so I was happy about that.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, he's a amazing interview subject. I wish it had been actually for audio, but it was for print, so we had to do a lot of post work to kind of make it comprehensible. But I'm very proud of that interview as well.
And outside of the realm of film?
Yeah, authors, designers, artists. I generally gravitate towards creative people. Some other notable people that I'm particularly proud of. The last interview that I did before I actually started working on this documentary was an interview with Sarah Schulman, author of Conflict is Not Abuse and Gentrification of the Mind. And I was really proud of that interview. And she's actually one of the first people that I've actually seen the movie. And it was really honored that she gave it her support and kind of said, good job with that, because her approval on that actually meant a lot to me. A lot of people. Sorry, the list is fairly long.
So, and mostly for publication in magazines.
Yeah.
And do you have your own website? Can we?
Yeah, I do. It's asherpenn.com. I think it needs to be updated.
Okay, cool. And tell us about your arts practice.
So I came out of, I went to art school, I studied photography, and I graduated around a time when photography was going through a huge transformation. I went to school for photography between 2000 and 2004. It was a kind of a Renaissance moment, kind of like along with a Renaissance moment with a lot of independent publishing. And but then right around 2004, it kind of burst with the invention of Flickr. And all of a sudden, and consequently, more and more magazines kind of continued to fold. The budgets started to fold, and photography as an enterprise kind of became a lot less attractive. And fine art became a lot more attractive. So I got very involved in artist books. I self-published and distributed a lot of artist books in my early 20s. I worked at Printed Matter in New York and did a lot of exhibitions with small independent galleries. I kind of got a little burned out on it, to be honest. I feel like I was very excited to have the opportunity to hold space or whatever. But at a point, I kind of realized that I didn't actually feel like I had very much to say as an artist. And that was kind of when I leaned more into interviewing and filmmaking eventually, and which I feel is kind of a space where I feel a little more comfortable.
And in preparation or between making your first experimental documentary and this one, did you do any formal film training? Did you experiment with filming your interviews? I mean, I am imagining a lot of them were kind of Zoom anyway, right?
It's embarrassing to say that this was literally the first interview that I'd ever filmed.
Really?
Yeah. And we had a half an hour to just make sure, with somebody sitting in Gabor's spot to make sure that everything looked okay. And they were kind of like, I think it looks okay. And I'd mostly done continuing education. So taking some classes here, some classes there and stuff. But no truly formal degrees or certificates or diplomas or anything.
Okay, so perhaps you can tell us what the trick is, to kind of landing all these interesting interview subjects when you're working for, pretty small publications,
Yeah.
and then leading up to how you persuade Gabor Maté to trust you with his story.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of things. In general, I mean, once you've been able to do one interview, it's really easy to kind of say, this is what I did. Would you be interested in being interviewed? And in general, showing enthusiasm from a point of research and saying, I know about this, I've been following this, I know about this thing, giving some kind of semblance of the fact that you're just actually coming in with some knowledge of this person's background and stuff like that. So I'm a little bit like Nardwuar in that way, that I really do prepare as much as possible to know. I mean, Abel Ferrara's got a lot of movies, and I really did see every single one of them to prepare. So I'm a bit of a completist that way. But and in general, I've always approached interviews, because I also don't have a journalism background. I've always kind of approached them as collaborative. I should probably also note that I came into interviewing at a period of time when most of it was online publishing. And so if the subject of an interview had a problem with something, that the wording of something had come out or something was, you couldn't just kind of like throw your hands up and be like, hey, it's out of our hands. We don't know what's going on. You totally can go and change that. And being an artist myself, I felt somewhat sensitive to their desire to be understood, and really approached them always as being fairly collaborative. So unlike a lot of professional journalists, I've often kind of gone back and said, did I get this right? Do you feel good about this? 90% of the time, it's fairly cosmetic tweaks, but then other instances, and a lot of these are, and other instances with people that often don't do interviews for this very reason. I've gotten some very extreme feedback saying, like, this is it. Please do not change my wording. Do not change this at all. This is how I want to be seen. And I'm very grateful for that because I do feel like a lot of journalism is kind of oriented more towards a bit of a gotcha moment, and is kind of, which I just have never really understood the value of it. But this is partially because, I mean, to me, being able to get insight into what an artist or a creative person is doing is not really, I don't really see the point of pulling a gotcha with them. So, I mean, Gabor, when it came to actually approaching him, and it was always the access that we had been granted, both in terms of the archival materials and for his vulnerability, was that this was going to be kind of okay by him, by the final product. I don't know if I recommend that to other filmmakers going into the documentary process, because it isn't always easy. And it is really challenging to be able to do something with creative integrity, and also but I'd never done anything at this scale before. And I think that I'm very lucky in that with choosing to make a documentary about somebody like Gabor, who is actually quite self-effacing and quite willing to be very open in ways that other people, even myself, would not be totally comfortable. Gabor is very open and quite generous. So, yeah.
So I'm interested in how you fixed on him as the subject for what would become your first official film. Um, when you approached him initially, was it already then the idea to make a film?
So, I mean, it's no secret because it's like literally in the beginning of the movie. I was getting sober and was kind of losing my mind a little bit. Had decided to move back to Vancouver and was really delving deeply into his books and was really excited by the fact that I didn't know that he was from Vancouver. Hadn't really heard of him before. Had never really. So when I found out that he was from Vancouver, I was intrigued by it and stuff. And it's a very natural instinct for me that once I'm getting excited about some kind of material like that, oh, maybe I can interview them. And I mean, that's happened a lot. So with Gabor, when I was researching him, beyond reading his books, I found that there seemed to be a lot of blind spots for his biography. There was a lot of stuff that I just couldn't really, like, what was he doing between this, and how did he get to this and this? And I just couldn't find a certain information about him, like on his Wikipedia entry and through interviews and stuff like that. Most of his interviews are him kind of talking about general. He's not as much talking about himself. He's talking about other people or society at large, and themes of addiction and trauma and ADHD and stuff. So I thought very opportunistically, it seems like there's an opportunity for a documentary here. And so that was kind of what led me to it, was just seeing that there wasn't a documentary. And this was at a point when also the other documentary about Gabor, The Wisdom of Trauma, hadn't come out yet. So it really seemed like a kind of like a real opportunity.
Yeah, because there's a vacuum.
Yeah.
And you approached Telus, right?
They came on down the road, but it was, at first it was just literally just me and him. And I had some ideas that I thought that I was going to get a grant, and quite arrogantly decided to...
Let's step back and say,
sure.
So your initial kind of pitch to Gabor, you're telling him that you had no formal film training, and it was just you, but you had this idea that you'd like make a documentary feature film about him.
Yeah, I know it sounds crazy now, but that's kind of how it started. I mean, I should also kind of admit that I had been trying to get in touch with him through different avenues and stuff like that. And I mentioned it to my dad one night over dinner that I was trying to get in touch with Gabor Maté, and he said, "Oh, I've got his email." Just being Jewish doctors from Vancouver. And so it wasn't that ended up actually being the way I was able to get in contact with him, which was awesome. I'm very, very lucky and fortunate that way. But I think that there was also a thing where just kind of approaching at the beginning of it, the conversation, it was just saying, "I'm interested in doing something with you. What's your availability like? Are you open to this? Are you interested in this? What could this be like?" And Gabor said very clearly, "I don't want you to be following me around with a camera for a week. I don't want to be that kind of thing." And I said, "That's okay, great. That's a really awesome, super clear parameter that, would you be open to a studio interview?" "Yes." "Would you be open to a few days of studio interview?" "Yes." "Okay, cool. I can figure out everything else after that." And I really did feel confident that I could do that. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Errol Morris and Fog of War in particular. And I did have faith that a single narrator interview could be a thing that could carry a film. And I did believe that somebody like Gabor did have the gravitas and the insight to be able to carry that as well.
At this stage, was it still just email?
We'd met once in person.
Was that kind of an interview audition kind of thing?
Yeah, it's so funny because looking back on it, I just I was like 3 months sober, a little loopy. And also having very little professional experience in this, just kind of thinking that anything's possible.
Yeah.
So I don't look at it, I wouldn't be approaching anybody that way today, given how challenging this movie has been to make. But at the time, I just thought, why not?
Okay, well, it worked. So you have his agreement in principle.
Mm-hmm.
What's the next step for you?
Just endless research. We booked a date, and then I think we had 3 months in advance, and I just went into researching and calling a lot of people that knew him, and also just reading every single article that he had ever written, every single article about him. And as suspected, the blind spots started to kind of open up. And the story and his stories really started to open up. And there's two things that were incredibly useful was being able to read all of his articles that he wrote for the UBC student newspaper, which were incredible, and to be able to kind of trace his development that way. Gabor has literally been published as an author since the age of 16, and we were able to find those writings all the way down to that point. He was also on Reach for the Top, but we weren't able to find that episode. I think that's been binned. But it was, and then also finding the archive of all of his writing for the Globe and Mail and the Province and the Vancouver Sun, which is pretty much seamless. There are very few gaps. He has been consistently writing for newspapers. Even when he was a medical student at UBC, he was editing a student medical journal. So there is, which is incredible as well, because you can notice the consistencies in the writing and also his development and shifts of perspective and stuff like that. But yeah, I'd encourage anybody with a library card to, if they're interested in Gabor, to further their knowledge by looking at some of the old Globe and Mail articles that he wrote. And yeah, and then talking to people that worked with him, talking with Ray, talking to his son Daniel, talking to nurses that worked with him, and just talking to pretty much anybody that would have crossed his path to get as much information as possible, so that I had some kind of idea of what the prompts were and what, but at the end of the day.
Were these like background interviews for your own benefit, or were these potentially going to be in the film?
So early on, there was a conversation about the possibility of, I would have been open to the idea of having other people weighing in, but certain people actually didn't really want to be interviewed. And instead of kind of trying to push that and saying, oh no, I really, really think you should do it, I kind of just was like, great, fine, awesome. I want this to be as frictionless as possible. We'll just go with a single narrator interview, and we're going to take on the responsibility. What I think is interesting about the single narrator approach, though, is that I think that it actually, you, as an audience member, you really take on the role of assessing what is the truth, or what, being able to take what the person is saying at face value. Whereas I think that possibly when you start bringing in the other voices and stuff like that, it becomes a little bit, it seems like that there's a bit of an official story kind of going on. So yeah, in general, that was the overall approach, was just, okay, cool. You don't want to be interviewed for this documentary. Great. Perfect. We're going to go with a single narrator. That's going to keep things really simple, really clean. And I honestly do believe that it was effective.
Sure.
Yeah.
When you're doing these interviews in preparation with other people, Is Gabor helping you with that? Is he like opening his Rolodex, as we used to say back in the day?
A little bit. It was more kind of Gabor and Ray and Janos and Daniel. All of them would make suggestions about people I should speak to and stuff. But I mean, he was consistently busy throughout the entire process of. I mean, he literally wrote The Myth of Normal was throughout the process. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's in constant demand.
Yeah.
And were there financial arrangements? I know that he commands speaking fees if he chooses to.
No. No, he's not a producer or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. But you referred earlier to an understanding that he would have, in effect, final cut. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I would kind of go with the argument of good faith in this, in that we were asking a person in good faith to open up to me as a director and to also generously make available his family archive of photographs, and that in general that we could come to a place where we were, and it's literally using his words, not really kind of manipulating his words to any effect, that was going to be the I've never really worked any other way, honestly. I mean, I've had a few interviews kiboshed and not published because the interview subject just was unsatisfied with it, and I'm far more happy to do that than to put something out into the world that the interview subject feels is a poor representation of themselves. I mean, it's hard though, like being totally blunt, like it is difficult to fully represent somebody, and somebody like Gabor especially, because he's lived a very, very, very productive life. I mean, there's a lot of things that we didn't have time to go into, like the fact that he edited a medical journal while in medical school. So there were certain avenues that just for the sake of being able to tell a story, had to kind of, or the fact that there was a lot also I had to take into consideration the fact that there's going to be some people that are going to see this movie that have never heard of him. So they need to understand a very rudimentary idea of what this person's doing. But at the same time, there's all these podcasts, all these interviews, there's books. So if you really want to get an understanding of what this person's about, you might want to be able to, I don't want to just echo stuff that's already out there. So it was generally important to try to tell a story that was unavailable otherwise.
Yeah, I suppose we should bear in mind that there may be people listening to this podcast who don't have a very specific idea of who he is either.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'd like to take that on.
Sure, yeah. I mean, his website will say that Gabor is a world-renowned expert, sought-after expert speaking on issues of ADHD, mind-body connection, and addiction and trauma. And those are the kind of the touchstones of his 4 books, the first one of which is Scattered. It was published in the U.S. as Scattered Minds. That came out in the mid-'90s. And then When the Body Says No, about the mind-body connection, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, about addiction, and the latest book, The Myth of Normal, which in my opinion, kind of encapsulates all 3 books and kind of pushes it a little bit further. But I think of Gabor as, one of Canada's best authors, and a really unique hybrid as somebody that does have an education and a background in medicine, but is also in many ways, and my guess is if he had never studied medicine, he probably would have become a journalist. And has been somebody that has been able to take a lot of information that is already out there and to be able to shape it and put forth propositions that have always been consistently radical for the time they came out. So a lot of these talking points of ADHD, mind-body connection, and addiction and trauma are today, I think, quite, they're pretty much part of the dominant narrative in many ways. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, and I think that's largely thanks to people like Gabor, who at times really pushed these ideas forward at a time when nobody else was really thinking about things like that. I mean, and I do also believe that for certain people at certain points in their life, when they're kind of looking at themselves and kind of saying, like, I'm struggling with addiction, what do I do? There is something about his books that really does help somebody feel seen in a way that, I know was extremely useful for me. He's also just, I want to say, like a really talented author. He's a very good writer. Mm. And for me in particular, some of the passages in Scattered and When the Body Says No, are beautiful and heartbreaking and touching, and he's a very talented speaker. One of the things that the documentary covers that I think is interesting is the fact that he was, right after getting after graduating UBC, he taught in high school in North Van. And I do believe that there's something to be said about his abilities as a public speaker and as a teacher and as a communicator, and also in a very broad sense, not in a very aggressively academic way, that totally comes from that background of being able to communicate directly to people, from a stage.
What was the first of his books that you read, and what was it that really was different about it from your point of view as a recovering addict?
It's been a while. This was a little over 5 years ago now, and so it's hard to really pinpoint it. I think Gabor is able to really connect to the emptiness that the bottomless pit that an addict kind of faces, and the hopelessness of it, and also kind of he gets it on a very, very simple level, that people are addicted not because sugar is sweet, or alcohol tastes good, or whatever, or it's it's a way of numbing pain, right? And he understands this on a very holistic level, and is able to kind of recognize that the desire to numb pain is something that is expansive in its power. And I had never really heard anybody put it on those terms, just kind of saying, like, you're not addicted because you lack willpower or self-control. It's not about that, because a lot of the times you think that it is when you're in early recovery. You think it's like, I just don't have enough self-control. I just need to pull myself up by my bootstraps and just get my shit together. And
it's what everybody's telling you have to do.
Yeah. And then somebody kind of saying, actually, it seems like you're in a lot of pain, and I get why you would want to. I understand why you would want to numb yourself out if you're in that much pain. And, mm-hmm. Pain is immeasurable, right? It is not something that we have like any kind of metric for. So I felt really seen as an addict, and it felt like a really necessary first step by reading that. And then, I don't know, it was just stuff that I hadn't really looked at in myself. And I do believe that, some of his central theses are, at the time when I was reading them, they were revelatory, understanding that, and being able to see a connection between ADHD and the same kind of tendencies as addiction, and just being kind of like people, the tuning out being a coping mechanism was mind-blowing for me. that I wasn't tuning out because I was just kind of like a little like too overly excited or something like that. I was literally doing it because just as a way to feel comfortable in myself and my own body at the time. These were really interesting ideas. And I don't know. I mean, yeah, and at this point in time, I really feel that I accept them as just being obviously. But where I was at, it didn't feel that way at the time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, I guess at this stage, you're also having to do things you've never had to do before, like do a grant applications for the film, find funding, bring on a team. Did you have a team?
Was there a team? There really wasn't a team for a while. I kind of thought that I'd hired some really talented cinematographers and sound person, and they kind of gave me the footage and said, "Okay, well, I guess you got to find an editor." And I did not know any editors in Vancouver, and so what started was pretty much just like editing this thing. First there was, I worked with a few people along the way, some story consultants that looked at like the paper cut and kind of worked with me to put together a cut of that. Mm-hmm. But it was nothing was consistent at all. And I wasn't really sure whether or not it was actually ever going to get completed or finished or something like that. But eventually I was able to put together a rough cut of what was the first 45 minutes. An angel investor came on board. Then I was able to finally hire an editor, Liam Sheriff, who has stuck with the project all the way through, who's incredibly, incredibly talented. And as Liam came on board, other people came on board. I was able to hire a really talented researcher, Jenna. And and eventually was able to find myself working alongside Shannon Walsh, who really was the person that brought the project to completion. Mm-hmm. But yeah, a lot of this, I went to school in the States. I lived in the States on and off for about 15 years, and I don't have much of a professional network in Vancouver. So a lot of this was also about finding, and COVID was happening, so it was a really decentralized kind of period of time. And but I'm really glad, honestly, for this process and how it all went down, because I do think that it's kind of all the things that were challenges and that I didn't really understand and stuff like that are the things that I think have made this movie what it is today.
How many hours interview did you get?
I think it's 10 hours, but it might be longer. It might be 15. I haven't looked in a while.
And was that spread across
3 days?
And were those consecutive days, or were they spread out?
It's consecutive. It might have actually been 2 days. It's been a minute. I think it was actually 2 days now that I'm thinking of it. So it was consecutive, and it was largely chronological. Right. I mean, it really was like, let's start at the beginning. We're doing life story, and being able to kind of go through it as much as possible. We didn't really jump around very much.
And was there an opportunity or a need to kind of top up beyond those couple of days, or you just had what you had and that was it?
I felt very satisfied with first of all, we had a ton. I mean, that's a lot, a spoil of, and I did not feel that there was much that I really wanted to cover after that point. I definitely did not want to chase any kind of topicality in order to make it more relevant to whatever today was. I felt that in general, we were putting together something that was meant to be, for lack of a better, iconic. And, I never really felt that urge, honestly. And I don't, and I really did not want to chase any kind of any talking points that it came up after we shot the interview. So, yeah, does that cool?
So, you went in, you've done all this prep, you have an idea of where the conversation is going to go. Were there surprises though?
Yeah. I mean, there were surprises during the interview, you mean? Not really. If I'm being totally honest, I think it was in general. I mean, the main surprise was that the moment we sat down and started doing the interview, and I realized just how amazing this interview was going to be. You've got to remember, I've never interviewed this guy before. I've never sat down with him in a studio. We've never done a test shoot or anything like that. And once we started, and I knew we were getting this incredible sound and all these different angles of camera, and realizing, oh my God, like this is amazing. Like we're getting this, we're capturing these moments because, he is so deeply evocative and so articulate, and I was surprised also by how emotional and how moving this story was. I can say in certain ways that this was one of the most emotional interviews I've ever conducted, and Gabor's kind of willingness to look into himself was really touching. He really was able to get in touch with feelings and stuff like that in a way that I'm very grateful for.
Yeah, very candid.
Yeah.
And I mean, in some ways that doesn't seem surprising because of his professional practice, and that's what he's expecting from the people that he's treating, I suppose. But at the same time, as you noted, that's not much in the public record, him talking about his own life.
Yeah. It was really moving. It was really moving and touching to see somebody. I mean, honestly, I think with him in particular, I mean, there aren't as many reasons to go into these kinds of things. If I'm interviewing William Gibson about his latest book, I don't really have much of a good reason to talk about his relationships or his, whatever. But because of the fact that we're talking about a world-renowned addiction expert that has a central thesis that people's life experiences form their pathos and behaviors as adults. This is what it makes total sense, and so it was kind of perfect that way.
I guess you referred to having to edit this down, and that's a long-term kind of process and evolution. At what stage are you sharing it with Gabor?
We shared it with him at multiple, kind of at the halfway point, and then he was very encouraging and very enthusiastic. Then when we were coming closer to being completion, then it became a lot more engaged and a lot more because the thing we're getting closer and certain and I really have to say that it was extremely fortunate that at that juncture, that was around the time that Shannon Walsh came on board, and I feel like she was really able to help me navigate that and help Gabor and his family as well in terms of navigating that. Because, I mean, I can say as a filmmaker that my experience was that as things got closer to people saying like, it's kind of done now. Like you're pretty much, you can't change it anymore. You can't tweak it anymore. When people started saying that kind of stuff to me, I got terrified because I'd been working on it for a while, and I just was so used to being able to make a little improvement here and there, and I think the permanence of the movie being completed for both Gabor and myself, we both had to kind of reconcile with that, and it wasn't easy.
So Shannon was the one who was able to kind of marshal that.
And because, Shannon's such an incredibly talented filmmaker, and she also is really, I needed somebody that could kind of advocate for the film and advocate for my vision, and also advocate for Gabor and Ray and Daniel as well, and be able to kind of mediate
between the two, between you and them?
Yeah, at a certain point.
So, that suggests that there were bones of contention.
I think that there were some things that we needed to make sure that we were on the same page about. That it took a little bit of a while. I don't want to get into any kind of. I don't really want to air any of that out right now. But yeah, it wasn't. It's an extremely vulnerable film.
Of course.
So in general, even being able to assure him that this was the right thing to do, and that this film was being made in good faith, and that this film was actually going to, was something that people were interested in. As it became closer and closer to being completed, I think he needed that assurance.
Right. I'm just struggling to understand, in as much as, it is his own words. And so I'm not asking you to be specific.
So for example, I'm going to go through, we're going to have this podcast, and I'm going to be embarrassed about something that I said, or think that I could have said something differently, or
me too.
Exactly, right? So I'm speaking for myself now, and but at the same time, there's going to be something that I might be a little embarrassed with. Did I say it right, or did I say it wrong? Or people are going to think weird things about it. And right now, I'm okay, right? And even when I leave this, I'm going to probably just say, I don't want to make it difficult for VIFF, and I don't really want to, But then, it might come out, or tomorrow or the next day, I might just say, I said something I really regret.
Could you just take out that?
Can you please just take that bit out, and now expand this to a feature-length documentary that is going to be playing to, and to a fairly large scale. What happened in a studio and what happened between emails and Vimeo links is all of a sudden getting put out to a different scale. I think it's terrifying. And I think that this is also one of the reasons a lot of people don't kind of give this level of approval to their subjects, because it's totally a potential to sabotage an entire project. But this was the arrangement that we had, and I'm so glad that we were able to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So the film's about to have its world premiere?
Yeah.
And
which is crazy, by the way. I need to say this because I think this is a really amazing little tidbit. The opening scene of the film is literally the same room as that we will be premiering the film. The film opens with a lecture Gabor gave at SFU last September, and we will be premiering the film in the exact same theater. I don't know how many films get to say that.
Not too many.
No.
That's sweet. Do you know what the next evolution for the film will be? Are you doing a festival kind of circuit, or when it's going to be available beyond the festival screening here in Vancouver?
I have no idea.
See what happens.
Yeah, we're applying for other festivals, and we're starting to get feedback. We really were completing this film, putting finishing touches on it, all the way up to delivering the DCP to the week before we delivered the DCP to VIFF. So it's very, very, very fresh. So we've only just started to get feedback from people, and so far it's been just very gratifying and affirmative.
Do you know what you're going to be doing next? Have you got another film planned?
Yeah, I've got a couple. I would very much like to be able to continue making Vancouver-based documentaries. So there's a couple of projects that I've been applying for some grants this week, literally. There's a documentary about a continuing education class about stand-up comedy, for stand-up comedy that I'm interested in doing. And there's also a documentary about somewhat of a high-profile Vancouverite that I'd really love to pursue, but I have not heard anything back from them yet.
Perhaps I'll be checking out Physician Heal Thyself.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much for having me.